So this absolutely contradicts what we have in the Book of Mormon, what Joseph taught already. So let's the first thing that I immediately thought of, right? Alma 12:24. This life is the time to prepare
Mhm.
to meet God. Like,
That whole chapter from
yeah.
verse 19 all the way through the end of the chapter.
So we've got plenty of things to kind of go over here. Zion Media at it again, talking about some things that only somehow they know the truth about. Modern day Gnostic Pharisees, I think, is probably a better way to go about it with them. But so let's go ahead and kind of give an interesting. Let's give what we can show here when it comes to uh, our subject here. We have here the video that they recently released as of 8 days ago. This is Joseph Smith hinted at this, but we missed it entirely. So we're talking about multiple mortal probations here. So let's go ahead and take a look.
And this one,
When you
this
say
one,
multiple mortal probations, that's a term that people have just given that. That's not a doctrinal term. I wouldn't find that in any scriptures, but I will see eternal lives and eternal deaths in the scriptures, right? Okay.
yep,
Okay, so here's the issue with this, right? We're already starting off the bat with kind of a manipulation tactic, right? We're already starting off with kind of distancing away from the concept, or at least the term, multiple mortal probations, in order to deflect criticism or anything like that, and then conveniently substitutes it with the notion of quote unquote eternal lives. And there's a big issue with that. So Jessica, what is kind of your thoughts with this?
Well, I agree. I think that he's kind of repackaging it. So, multiple mortal probations is kind of like the newer term that came up probably more in the 20th century. And it is a different repackaging of an old reincarnation doctrine. And from everything that I've looked at, there's several different versions of reincarnation. Like there's tons of different definitions. And so for me, I had to go back and look at how the church defines it and kind of get a grip on specifically what they've addressed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that's being presented here, where essentially one soul, like one spirit, would inhabit multiple bodies and live multiple mortal lives as part of a process of ascension. That's what he's pitching
Right.
here. And so it is a form of reincarnation, and it has been addressed many, many, many times in this church. So that's what I've found on it.
Well, and that I think is something that is ultimately incredible to point out here. It's been addressed multiple times. I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at, especially within the week or so that this has been kind of floating out there, um, at least this particular video anyway, is something that was ultimately taught by the prophet's Joseph Smith's grandnephew, right? In Doctrines of Salvation's Volume 2, Joseph Fielding Smith actually elaborates on what eternal lives ultimately means. And this goes into what the Lord himself says in section 132. And honestly, like, this can go off in multiple different directions, but keeping with what we're talking about here, it means prosperity and continuation of the family organization in eternity. This has nothing to do with living multiple mortal lives, which honestly is equivalent uh, um, to reincarnation, what they're trying to assert here. But later on in the video, they try to say that this is just a misconception, but we'll get to that in a bit. But there's a lot here that they're already starting off here. It's a manipulation tactic. They're manipulating the language to make it seem, oh, this is not as voodoo-ish as we're trying to make it seem.
Even if it's not as voodoo-ish, and I agree, I think that is essentially what's happening. It's like, let's just rebrand it a little bit and
Right.
then we can pitch it again under a new title. And this is how these things go down, you guys. Like, if you dig into church history and you see that the church has dealt with all of these things many, many times before, they take on different names, different kind of definitions, and then they also have different ideas. So, like, there's different versions of it. that happen. So like one of the versions that has happened over the years is there's this old idea, and I think this comes from Jewish mysticism. I was trying to figure out the origin, but it's essentially the concept of how iniquity is sort of like this idea that we take on kind of like generational sin, generational trauma. It's kind of passed down through our genes genetically. We kind of know this at this point in time with our studies of genetics. But there's like this idea that this also happens spiritually. And that has somehow gotten morphed into other ideas about reincarnation. Like, for example, one would be that you're taking on like a portion of like all the souls that came before you, and you're essentially becoming like an amalgamation or a combination of like every person who's your progenitor. And then this is like another form of ascension. In this version that they're talking about here in this video, from what I could tell, it looks like it's not necessarily taking on former people, like former lives, and merging them into one. It's the idea that he was presenting was more like it's one soul. So like if it's me, for example, I might have lived multiple lives from Adam and Eve up till this point just to get to this like spiritual level that I'm at right now in mortality. And one of the ideas he kept saying was that like when you die, it's like that cycle starts, you go back, you're judged, and essentially your slate is like wiped clean if you're accepting the Savior's atonement, and then you can kind of move on into the next probationary period, and this is like the path of ascension. But this is like a completely different religion really than what we believe. And so this is like some of that subcultural stuff that I see happening in the church, and I always feel like it's so difficult to want to take on the Christian world at large when we have our own problems. And so I really like these kinds of topics because I feel like I run into this kind of stuff a lot in the church. And then when I start digging into it, I find that I'm not the first generation to have encountered this. It's been going on and on since the start of the restoration.
Right. Well, and the thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that, they're trying to, throughout the entirety of this video, they're trying to make it seem like Joseph Smith taught this. But the thing is, though, is that there's nothing that we've been able to find explicitly, whether in the Revelations or in his journals or anything like that, that Joseph Smith actually taught this at all. There's only later speculation from folks like Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff and several others. But the thing is, though, is that it's entirely speculative. But the thing is that this speculation is being seen as, oh, this is 100% the gospel truth, and yet it's not.
So can I say something about that?
Yeah.
So when I was looking that up, there were some things that I noticed, and it was actually Wilford Woodruff who called this out, and he was basically concerned, and so was Joseph F. Smith. Okay, they were very concerned that there had been, I don't know what the right word to say is, like things that were mistranscribed, because everything we have from that period, there's nothing verbatim. Okay.
Right.
Like you don't have verbatim quotes. You have like, maybe a few phrases verbatim, maybe one or two sentences, whatever somebody could jot down correctly. But, when you're handwriting and doing shorthand to capture notes, and he's got one or two scribes like doing this all the time to try to capture his sermons, you're never going to get it fully correct. This is true with journals of discourses.
Right.
This is why people love anti-Mormons, anybody who wants to attack the church, anybody who's trying to find support for a weird fringe idea. You can find it in journals of discourses because it's just, there's so much error there. And in Doctrines of Salvation, Joseph Fielding Smith talked about this, and he, like, for example, I don't want to get on a tangent, but one example is like Adam God theory. Okay. There's these ideas that are recorded somewhere, and it's difficult to sift through. And Joseph Fielding Smith had shared an opinion about this in Doctrines of Salvation, where he was just like, look, I've looked at everything that Brigham Young ever taught that we have recorded. And he's like, I just don't think that this is actually what he thought. I think this is being, it looks to be like an error or misunderstanding about things that he may have said or taught. And I think that this is just one of those things where it's like we really have to be careful when we're looking at this kind of stuff. And I think this speaks to, for me, the importance of having a testimony of the living prophet and then looking at the collective witness over time. Because Joseph Smith said he would give us a key that'll never rust. If we
Right.
stick with the majority of the 12 apostles and the records of the church, we will not be led astray. And I think that this is a really good discernment tool. And it's something that I use because I think you always have to kind of get at what do the scriptures say? What's the core doctrine? What do they say
Mm-hmm.
about a topic? Then you can look at the supporting teachings of the living prophets and apostles, and then maybe the older ones that, you know, could have some historical inaccuracies or mistranscriptions. Then you can look at policies that the church has implemented over time to kind of gain an understanding. And then you can kind of look more into like that theoretical realm, which is what this is. This is a theory. It's like a theoretical, very esoteric idea that's
Mm-hmm.
based on certain scriptures, but the church has addressed it already. So hopefully we can dig into that a little bit.
Right. So this is something that I think kind of builds into this next clip. Not very long here, but it also kind of shows the kind of the mentality of the folks at Zion Media, where they're claiming higher knowledge, kind of a bit of a problem that was existent in the Gnostics back in the day.
Would be what? 800 million? If we got 8 billion?
Man, maybe.
There's 8 billion people.
So on the spot.
800 million. I'm a math guy, so 800 million. I mean, that's still a pretty good chunk of people.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, this guy's over here
for sure.
like, just let me give my presentation. Please
Right.
stop
Let's
asking me
dive
math
in
questions.
here and get started on this topic here. So this is a little bit of a refresher. Remember that all truth is independent in that sphere in which God has placed it, which means telestial truth will not always support terrestrial truth. Or in other words, if you're on a telestial level with your knowledge, you're probably not going to understand terrestrial knowledge. And if you're on a terrestrial level, you're probably not going to understand celestial knowledge. So what we're doing in here in these episodes is building upon our preparatory knowledge and bringing in the fullness of the gospel and all those truths that Joseph taught. And so let's talk about the difference between.
How elitist is that? How elitist?
Peter, where it's basically like no scriptures of private interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
This is why.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of why, because you can go look at everything apart he's saying isn't like really part of that. Now, I agree with one idea, and that is that it's true. It's like there's like certain, there's kind of like, again, it goes back to core doctrine and then kind of like building out from there. And it's true that like things that are like, you could have like a basic truth, for example, like the golden rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like a, I guess you could say, telestial view of like what the higher rules that we were given from God were, which were part of the 10 Commandments, which is love God, love your neighbor. And like that's where that do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It kind of is rooted in that. So there's like, I guess you could say like perceptions about truth, but I think truth is eternal, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just truth is truth. And we have a hard time, I think, seeing beyond maybe like our surroundings. And that's that concept of like the veil, right? Like it's like we can't always pierce the veil and see everything. We're in a construct right now. Like we don't have that ability. And I think that I don't know, there's like some arrogance happening here. And I think that that's maybe just something to take note of because if you watch this whole thing, there's basically a let me give you the definition of the scriptures and tell you
Right.
what they say.
Well, and
And
like
it goes on throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, well, and like I mentioned, it's all about being super elitist in this thing. I mean, you know, if you don't have celestial knowledge, or if you have a terrestrial knowledge, you're not going to have a telestial knowledge, and if you have a telestial knowledge, you're not going to, or terrestrial knowledge, you're not going to have a celestial knowledge. Like, hold on a second. Like
Mhm.
how elitist is that? Really? It's so elitist
Well,
in
as
that
it
sense.
goes on, it got even more elitist because it was talking about like it was basically saying this is how I took it. Okay, this is my
Mhm.
interpretation of what was being said here, and it really doesn't sit well with me. There was this idea that if you're born into the church with the gospel, then this is like a sign that like signifying that you had achieved the privilege of that, like in these premortal lives, like these well, not premortal lives,
Mhm.
but previous mortal lives. So not
Right.
premortality, but like mortal lives that you had like ascended through, and that you're privileged to be born in a certain time, and then you can be privileged to be born in the New Jerusalem and privileged to be born in the millennium and all these things. And it was all just so centered on this hierarchical privilege idea,
Yeah.
which is rooted in so many false priesthood orders that have existed in the world. And I don't even know a better word for it because they really are. They're like a false priesthood order. It's like this hierarchical, like weird idea of ascension that doesn't really have to do with, I think, what we're taught clearly by the prophets and the apostles today and consistently over time. So I don't know if we can dig into some of that, but I think you can show in the scriptures that this idea is not correct and that the
Oh
way these
yeah.
verses are being interpreted is not, it's not right.
Oh no, not at
It
all.
There's just so many contradicting, like you guys could literally go to your gospel topics and look up resurrection, immortality, eternal lives, like just look at all the scriptures and you'll see what I mean.
Hmm. So this actually kind of gets into the next topic here with the very first clip that is entirely about the that's entirely a doctrinal error. Just kind of starting off here. So here let's go ahead and
For
watch
that
this.
here, there's two options there, though. So, as we define resurrection, well, we've already defined it. It's basically a rebirth of both the spirit and the body. So, the doctrine of eternal lives says that once individuals are cleansed from sin or made innocent again through Christ's atonement or through their own suffering, either option, their spirits are then united with a new physical body in a new mortality on the earth. In other words, they're born of woman again into a new probationary period where they're tested and proved to see if they'll do all things whatsoever the Lord their God shall command them.
Okay, so we have our first aspect of false doctrine here. um, so this absolutely contradicts what we have in the Book of Mormon, what Joseph taught already. So let's the first thing that I immediately thought of, right? Alma 12:24. This life is the time to prepare
Mhm.
to meet God. Like,
That whole chapter from
yeah.
verse 19 all the way through the end of the chapter.
In fact, like I actually got a hard copy right here.
Good.
Got my quad out here. So yeah, like these scriptures I've gotten a lot more worn just with this topic in particular. I was like, hold on a second. So yeah, like Alma chapter 12, we're going into verse 24 here. Like yeah, we're kind of proof texting, but whatever.
No, we're not, because look at the context of this. So, like, if you
Right.
go to the chapter header, Alma speaks to Zeezrom. The mysteries of God can be given only to the faithful. Men are judged by their thoughts, beliefs, words, works. The wicked will suffer spiritual death. This mortal life is a probationary state. The plan of redemption brings to pass the resurrection. We are right in the right chapter.
Yes.
This is exactly what the chapter's about.
Yeah.
And starting in verse 19, so this isn't proof texting, he's addressing this specific doctrine
Yeah. So
of mortal life and resurrection.
yeah. And so that's kind of thing here. But I do want to focus on 24. We see that death comes upon mankind, yea, the death which has been spoken of by Amulek, which is the temporal death. Nevertheless, there was a space granted unto man in which he might repent. Therefore, this life became a probationary state, a time to prepare to meet God, a time to prepare for that endless state which has been spoken of by us, which is after the resurrection of the dead. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you know when new videos drop. Also, I've started compiling an Amazon list of book recommendations if you're curious what I've been reading when it comes to the information I use for these videos. Check out the link tree in my bio for more.